SVCN's Lunchtime Activate Your Impact Nonprofit Policy Webinar Summit. I have my lunch. Do you? You know, nonprofit organizations already do so much in our community, especially in times of great need like now. And it's also important that every nonprofit use its voice and lift up community voices to bring lasting positive change for the community we serve. We at SVCN believe that advocacy is a sacred duty of nonprofits and should be a core competency. So SVCN, that's the name of my organization, is here to help you advance your mission, secure needed resources, and work with you to build an equitable and thriving community. We are, I should say, incredibly grateful to our sponsors for sticking with us as we pivot from our in-person summit to a 5-webinar series. And I want to thank them now by name. Palo Alto Medical Foundation, Sutter Health, Applied Materials Foundation, El Camino Health, the Health Trust, Housing Authority Santa Clara County, Santa Clara Family Health Plan, SV at Home, and Valley Medical Center Foundation. And special thanks to Destination Home for sponsoring this particular webinar. Our topic today is how nonprofits can empower the communities they serve to solve problems at the root and avoid what author Anand Giridharadas calls fake change. Of course, we wish we were all together in person so we can interact with each other, but we're going to do our best to answer your questions and capture your ideas. My colleague Jen Turai, who's our Director of Learning and Membership Engagement, will explain the logistics of this webinar and introduce our moderator. Thanks.
Thank you, Kira. So I want you all to know about some of the functions that we will be using today. So with Zoom, if you are not yet familiar, there are different ways that you can view whoever is speaking. So there's gallery or speaker view, and you should be able to find the little icon in your upper right corner that can change it from gallery view to speaker view. You can pin a speaker. There's a little blue square in the upper right corner of people's videos where you can pull down a menu and you can pin a video or spotlight a video. So feel free to play around with that. We will be using the Q&A function. So if you look at your icons, I believe it's at the bottom of your screen. Q&A is where you can enter in the questions that you have for our speakers, and they'll be able to answer those questions in a reply thread. And so just so everybody is aware, I will be compiling all of the questions that you all have and include the answers that our panelists give. And we'll send that out to all of you after this session. When you when you end this webinar, if you leave at any time or when we end the webinar ourselves, it will ask you if you want to open up a new pop-up window. That actually leads to our evaluation of this session. I urge you to please fill out the evaluation. It's a SurveyMonkey. It is very short, but the answers that you would provide us are really helpful in me planning out the future programming for SVCN, not just with our summits, but also with our workshops and other events, as well as policy-focused events. So please, I ask you to fill that out when the session's over. And then, like I said, I will send a follow-up email. I will copy all of our speakers today so that they can also be connected with all of you. So keep an eye out for that. On that note, I will go ahead and pass it over to my colleague, Wendy, who is our Chief Strategy and Policy Officer.
Thanks, Jen, and a good afternoon to everyone who has joined us. We are so incredibly grateful to have you all here today to learn a little bit about how organizations in our community are empowering the communities in which they serve. As Kira noted in her opening remarks, there is so much good work that our nonprofits are doing in community, and we believe the time is more urgent than ever to lift up the voices of those folks in our communities who have been traditionally marginalized. And advocacy is a great way to lift up those community voices to bring about that system change we are all working so hard to bring together. As I mentioned, we're incredibly honored to have a great set of panelists with us today to share their experiences and bringing the voices of the communities that they serve to the forefront of their advocacy. Our moderator today, Maria Noel Fernandez, could absolutely teach a master class on organizing. Maria Noel is the Deputy Executive Director of Working Partnerships USA, where she oversees the organizing, communications, and operations departments. And she has a long history of building coalitions and community power to win groundbreaking change for working families in Silicon Valley. Maria Noel also directs the Silicon Valley Rising campaign, which has helped over 5,000 service workers in the tech industry organize for better wages and a voice at work. She has also been the mastermind behind a number of campaigns that have vastly improved the quality of life for working families here in Silicon Valley, including campaigns to raise the minimum wage in various cities, a general tax to shore up Santa Clara County's safety net, and a first in the nation opportunity to work initiative. She has also worked in a variety of capacities at the South Bay Labor Council, the California State Assembly, Sacred Heart Community Service, and the City of San Jose under then Vice Mayor Cindy Chavez. I am absolutely in awe of Maria Noel's vast body of work. I am definitely her #1 fangirl, and so it's my pleasure to introduce her today and turn the panel over to you. So welcome, Maria Noel Fernandez.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for that very kind introduction, and for the Silicon Valley Council of Nonprofits for putting together this conversation. Again, I am Maria Noel Fernandez with Working Partnerships USA, and I really am just so grateful to be in this space and conversation with you all. Before I actually turn it over to why we're all here, which is to hear our amazing panelists today, I want to take a moderator's privilege and to really acknowledge how timely this conversation feels, and also how difficult it also feels given what's happening in our communities. I think many of us are filled with grief and rage at what we saw in terms of the murder of George Floyd and the many Black lives that have been lost before George. And what has happened over the last few days, week now, once again exposed the truth that white supremacy and anti-Black racism remain the most dangerous and virulent pandemics in this country since its founding. They shape the patterns of power, health, and wealth, and that our communities were already experiencing daily, and that COVID-19 has only sharpened. And I truly believe eradicating these forces from our institutions and systems have to be the center of all of our change work and our empowerment work. So I feel like we cannot talk about empowerment today without that as a base for this conversation and our time together. Today is really a learning space on how the leaders and their organizations on this panel are centering the empowerment of the community they serve, and is meant to push our thinking a bit, our comfort level perhaps, to really think together about what empowerment really means, especially given this moment in our country, for very different types of organizations, and how we can either deepen, scale, or even start. So let's go ahead and just dive in. I've asked our panelists to introduce themselves, so I will call on you, say who you are, what you do, and share about what's giving you hope, air, or life in this moment. I want to invite Amelia to start us off.
Thanks, Maria Noel, and thanks everyone for the opportunity to be here today, and really excited to be here with Julie and Chad and Matt, and to get to learn from you, and Maria Noel, and to get to learn from all of you as well. So like I said, my name is Amelia. I'm an organizer, a popular educator, and I'm part of our leadership development team at Somos Mayfair. I also make art, I'm a nerdy book lover, and I love doing radical childcare with little ones. And I really come into this work through the women in my family, my mom, my grandma, my great-grandma, and all the different women in my family who organize both through direct action and also through building communities of care. I think they really taught me about everything from lending circles to sit-ins to how to make miracles with making like food and beds stretch to meet everyone's needs. And that's really what brought me to my work at Somos. Somos, for those of you who don't know, we're a neighborhood organization that's been working and building power in Mayfair and East San Jose for over 20 years. And we organize campaigns to demand changes through our family resource centers. We craft and manage our own alternative solutions, and we also build leadership to do this work. And my role at Somos is helping with our leadership development team, our Promotora network, and also our Universidad Popular de Mayfair, where we learn skills and analysis to carry out all of that work. Because like my grandma's taught me, you know, we believe that we can only make change and build safety and well-being together. So, thank you. Oh, and what's giving me hope right now are all the young people around the Bay Area and around the country who are leading the way in the streets, who are leading protests, uprisings, and also incredible acts of mutual care. And I just feel like if we follow their lead, we're going to be okay. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Amelia, and welcome to have so amazing to have Somos a part of this conversation. I want to turn it over to Julia. Who are you?
Thank you, Maria Noel. My name is Julia Cuevas, and I'm the Youth Advisory Council Manager at Fresh Lifelines for Youth, or more commonly known as the FLY program. And I, first and foremost, I am a wife and I'm a mother of two up-and-coming Chicana chingonas. I consider myself to be one as well. I am a proud Chicana for Black Lives Matter. And I am standing in solidarity with my Black and brown brothers and sisters today and every day. It's been a hell of a week in San Jose. San Jose is my community. I was born and raised in this city and I love it with my entire heart. And just to kind of say the thing right now, our city is on fire. Our city's on fire. I have the privilege to be able to live in downtown San Jose, and it's a little bit of a war zone, a bit of a war zone right now. And the people at the front lines of our work are our youth. I've been marching with our kids since Friday, and the vast majority of people on these front lines are our kids, our youth, our transition age young people who are igniting the flames of this revolution. And I am just so proud to stand alongside of them. A little bit about myself personally. Like I said, growing up here in San Jose, raised by my grandparents, John and Susan Bueno. Mom, love you, Mom. Spent a lot of my teenage years in the juvenile justice system myself, and locked up over here around the corner at 840 Guadalupe Parkway. A lot of my teenage years spent in the juvenile justice system. And it certainly leads me to do the work that I do today. I've been a youth practitioner for 10 years this August, and I thank God for the privilege to be able to do that as well. FLY, our mission is to reduce juvenile crime and incarceration through our 3 core programs of mentoring, leadership training, and legal education. FLY's programs and fundamental philosophy are founded on youth voice. Our founder talked to young people who were in maximum security units in juvenile hall and asked them what our youth needed over 25 years ago, and that's what they said. FLY is an agency founded on youth voice. Again, I am proud and privileged to be a part of that mission, and happy to talk about the initiative that I'm currently working on, which is the Youth Advisory Council. The Youth Advisory Council is a partnership between FLY and Santa Clara County Juvenile Probation. The council is a group of young people who are formerly system involved in our fundamental core philosophy. Who better? Who better to change the system? Who better to change this local juvenile justice system than the young people who've navigated it themselves? We really have to look at the resource in our youth and their true expertise that they carry and have brought to the table in the work that we've been doing for the past few years with the Youth Advisory Council. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. And I just want to really highlight this idea that you mentioned around, like, FLY is FLY because the youth wanted FLY to be, which is such a, I think a powerful statement, particularly in this conversation. Matt, who are you? Who is Sacred Heart, which I feel like doesn't really need an introduction because we all know y'all, but who are you? What's your organization? What's giving you hope?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Matt King. I am on the community organizing team at Sacred Heart Community Service, where we are forging new paths and turning a service organization into a solidarity and radical action organization. Maria Noel helped start that back in 2009, which is when I first got to Sacred Heart. So I got some of my first organizing lessons from Maria Noel, with Maria Noel. Before I was doing that, I was a newspaper reporter, and that was a decade of experience that really was my real education about what goes on in the world. It was the beginning of my politicization and radicalization. And then at Sacred Heart, it was just made it exponential. I've also done some organizing work in rural Western Colorado in the heart of Trump country, where I was excited to get pictures the other day of 600 people marching in the streets of Grand Junction in support of George Floyd and against police violence. As for what's giving me hope right now, forgive me, this story is going to start out a little bit as a downer, but it's going to turn around, I promise you. So one of the things that we do at Sacred Heart is we organize people who are and have been unhoused. The group is called Survivors of the Street, or SOS. And last week, we had a death in that family. 2 members of SOS, a married couple, Joel and Joelle, are living in shelters, and Joelle died in a shelter last week. Still trying to understand exactly what happened. So why is that giving me hope? Because that led to actually like us taking the leap of bringing people back together in person last night, because people were feeling very hungry for that sense of community and to get off the phone. So about 16 of us met in the park last night as an exercise for 2 big reasons. One, to offer that in-person support and community to Joel to help him through this time right now. And then also for the bigger reason of using Joel's death as a catalyst for pushing harder on the county and the city, getting people off the street, getting people into hotel rooms, getting people in to safer spaces. And I was just, and still am, immensely grateful for having that community last night. And the reminder of like the reason we do this is so when we have something like with Joelle dying, it doesn't just disappear into the ether, that people pick up that event and turn it into fighting for what communities need, because Joelle and Joel are a Black couple, and she was not killed by the police, but she is another Black life that was lost to the everyday slow violence of our communities. And that's why we're here. I know that's why everybody on this panel is here and doing the work they do all the time. So that is in fact giving me hope right now, that gathering last night. So thank you everybody for listening.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you. And to Joel. I now get to introduce Chad. Chad with Destination Home, again, another organization that continuously shows tremendous leadership, and I'm so happy to have you part of this conversation. Chad, tell us who you are.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me, and thanks to my fellow awesome panelists. I am Chad Bojorquez. I lead all of our initiatives at Destination Home, and I also helped co-create our Lived Experience Advisory Board, which is a board made up of all currently and formerly homeless individuals. So just by saying that, you can learn a little bit about my past. And I think if you don't know, Destination Home is a pretty small organization that kind of serves as like a collective impact convener around ending and preventing homelessness in Santa Clara County. We do a ton of things, from helping to build more housing to a pretty large homelessness prevention initiative that we do in partnership with Sacred Heart and 14 other organizations across the county. We have an employment initiative, and we have this kind of growing or emerging body of work around how do we center the voice of those who have been homeless or are homeless in our work. Because I think, how can we even pretend that we know what we're doing as the problem gets bigger and bigger? I think that we've, as an organization at Destination Home, I think have done a really incredible job bringing people around an issue and really kind of solidifying like what our common goals are, and a shared kind of accountability structure. But we have a lot of work left to do. So I think what gives me hope is that under the duress of the pandemic of COVID-19 and the emergency and all the stress that we're all experiencing over the last few months, especially, but you know, long before that, particularly spiked in November of 2016, that, you know, the systems that we've built that are working, all the connections that we have with people on this panel and across the community are just stronger under stress. So we've been able to raise and deploy through various programs, phases of programs, now totaling almost $30 million in emergency assistance relief for people who need it in Santa Clara County. Direct financial assistance. So we're just giving money to people because we really believe that people are going to do what they need to do, and people know what they need. We all know what we need, and we do the best for ourselves that we can. And the Lived Experience Advisory Board, which I'll probably talk more about, in the context of the questions, because I think that's kind of our focal point, has been also responding. We haven't been able to meet in person. And in fact, Matt, I really love that idea. I think we've been hungry for connecting, and we've had like some coffee chats where we kind of all sat like, far apart on outside benches and things like that. But we're going to need to be creative to get reconnected because we need to re-energize. But in the meantime, we've been doing kind of more of a service work. So we've been going to the encampments 3 or 4 times a week and distributing food and water. And those are things that the group advocated for. And I think that we all are aware of the global context, the Black Lives Matter and all of the stuff that's happening. But for us, sometimes the very apparent need is just that there's like people who are hungry and thirsty on our streets, upwards of 10,000 people in Santa Clara County. And we just can't ignore that. We have to be directly involved. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chad. I want to lift up something that you said that really spoke to me, and this idea that we know what we need, and this idea that the community that we pledge to serve are experts in their own lives. And I think when we talk about empowerment and advocacy, I think that's something that we really need to hold in our thinking, in our hearts and minds, of if we truly believe that each one of us is an expert in our own life, how do we as organizations honor that and really uplift that in the work that we do? And so as we have this conversation, I want to move to effective strategies, like the how. Like I actually think, folks are hearing this conversation, there's already this desire to be there, and there's this belief that this matters and is important. And so I want to get to, so then how? What are some effective strategies for doing real empowerment work and really engaging clients and community members, either in advocacy work or organizing, however it is that you really kind of define the type of work that you're doing, but what's the how? And why don't we go ahead and start a little differently here? Like, why don't we start with Julia, and then I'll bring others into the conversation. Julia.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Maria Noel. One, I think really key component, and Chad really lifted it up, was making sure that we are paying attention to what our people need, what our clients need, and listening to them, truly authentically listening to them. And from my standpoint, doing system reform work, the agency that I work for, FLY, we've really invested in paying attention to what our young people say about the juvenile justice system. Like I mentioned previously, our agency was built upon Youth Voice, but just recently, back in 2017, we launched our Youth Advisory Council, which is that unique partnership that I was talking about between probation and FLY. And we've recognized our young people, we have recognized our young people as the incredibly valuable resources that they are, right? We tell our youth every day, every time I'm with my young people, virtually now, right? That they are the system navigation experts. They are the credible messengers of our community. And it's only going to be with them that we are able to bring about this system change that our young people need. Our kids have said that they and their families have been traumatized by the juvenile justice system, by the justice system as an entity. And let me be clear, it's a wonderful idea. It's a great idea. And my next point is we have to sustain it. We have to sustain it. I can throw a large amount of money at experts that come through with these lofty credentials and are able to give me a really long report after they've done their analysis of my program. When the most valuable information, in fact, is with our community, with our kids, with our youth. And those resources have to be sustained. So our kids on YAC, we stipend them for every single touch point that they have with their agency, but that's not where it starts. Like, I wanna live in a community where my kids can get, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not rich, I work in nonprofit, but where my kids can afford to live in San Jose and invest in the community that they've chosen to invest in, that's the community that they love, right? They should be able to have health benefits. They should be able to have some sort of a retirement account, and do this work. Right? Our kids don't have access to the kind of quality education that a lot of my colleagues have had access to. And yet they're the ones, putting aside their life priorities to do this work, right? We have to continue to make this work sustainable for our community and our young people. And what I mean by that is we need to pay them for it. We need to pay them appropriately. We need to pay them fairly. And we need to offer them the training that they need to assume these positions with us, alongside us.
Thank you for that, Julia. Chime in here, Matt. What are some strategies that you all are using to make this real?
Is it okay if I just share something a little more big picture first? Just when I first got invited to do this a few months ago, and the idea of empowerment, it just made me think in general of how I see power functioning in nonprofit organizations, including Sacred Heart. I want to just say, like, we do not have it all figured out. It's an ongoing struggle for us as well. But one thing that I noticed that I think is a power dynamic in society that really gets replicated inside nonprofits is that I see us, when we're giving power to those who we see having more, and hoarding power from and over people we see having less. And to make that less abstract, one of my dreams for our community is for nonprofit organizations to be bolder and to take bigger stands, to put pressure on elected officials and other kinds of decision makers. And that is where I see us deferring to power. And then I think where I see us hoarding power is just in how we think about the services we're giving, how we are involving people in decisions that our organizations are making, and how our programs are designed, and our willingness to follow the lead of the people who are most affected, because that seems too bold or radical and we don't want to do that. And to just to tell a tale on us a little bit, we started doing voter guides in 2016 and soliciting community members' opinions of what we should be opposing or supporting on the state ballot or local ballot. And we were actually asked by another organization, DBUG, to support, I think it was Prop 57, which was a juvenile justice reform. I might have the number wrong. And this was the first time we did it. And we had a board president at the time who just didn't see how juvenile justice reform was a poverty issue and stood in the way of Sacred Heart publicly supporting Prop 57. Even though our community wanted it, our staff wanted it, people who were directly affected were asking us to do it. And the good thing that came out of that is that when we did it in 2018, we were able to flip that process. So instead of the board having first run at what the voter guide would be, that our community leaders and our organizing committee would do that and bring the recommendations to the board. And we were not blocked in any way in 2018. And then just before everything shut down, we had a big community gathering in late February to do that again. And we're having our people vote on what Sacred Heart should be taking public stances on. So that to me is just one example of how we in our roles need to be willing to turn over the reins and accept the outcomes of that decision. And then just one more clear example, in my role, I didn't think it's a great idea for Sacred Heart to wade into the Fair Elections Initiative for a lot of different reasons, not out of opposition. I just felt like, I think we might just better stay out of that. But we turned that decision over to the people at this community gathering. And ultimately, they kind of ended up in the same place. It was like a 60-40 vote for doing it, but we also had decided that we would need to have more like an 80% threshold one way or another to make a decision on anything. But that we were gonna live with that outcome, whatever it was, even though I personally was on the space of, oh, I'd rather not, one way or another. So that's an example.
Thanks for that, Matt. And I heard Chad start talking about this in his introduction in terms of kind of those spaces and those structures. I think when we talk about empowerment, it could feel like this abstract idea. And when we're talking about our institutions, I think what we're hearing, in part of this conversation, what I believe to be true is that we have to be thinking about the containers and the structures and the places that we're actually making it real. And so Chad, talk to us a little bit more about that board or committee and that structure where we have folks, where you all have folks directly impacted by everything, really making decisions, and how that works, and what did that mean for your organization to do that?
Yeah, thank you. Of course, it's an evolving process, but we found it to be pretty powerful, and we've discovered as an organization a lot of things along the way, just by committing, like you said, Matt, like kind of committing to wherever it takes us. And so we established, I want to say it was about 2 years ago, although time is kind of warping over this last few months. So I feel like 10 years has gone by. I'm sure everybody feels the same, but and we started the Lived Experience Advisory Board, and it was actually an idea between our executive director, Jennifer Loving, and Anthony King, who has formerly homeless and very active on many different boards in the community. And it was always vocal about programs that weren't working and change that needed to be happening. And so I think they kind of challenged each other to create this board and to give it a try. I just happened to be on staff around the same time and qualified to participate, so I helped to get it off the ground. And we have currently about 16 active members. We do provide a stipend for activities as well. And I would say that the board is largely autonomous, but aware of the structures that we're within. So we're affiliated with Destination Home, and we're officially a subcommittee of the Continuum of Care, which is like the county government structure that receives nearing $28 million of federal funding. And so it's kind of situated within the larger ecosystem, but all of the members are currently informally homeless. And then we have kind of ad hoc or kind of liaisons. We have a county liaison, and then we have somebody from Home Base, which is an organization that does awesome compliance and technical assistance work to kind of help keep us guided and take notes and help us access resources. And I think, there's been many examples of things that we've been able to do, like help craft policies that impact people who are currently homeless. For example, we helped rewrite the grievance procedure policy and the policy for what happens if somebody denies housing. So, we've all heard of Measure A and all of the awesome housing that's going up. I hope you have. If you haven't, let me know. And people are afraid, like, well, what if I don't want to live at Second Street Studios? Because it looks beautiful, but it's the neighborhood I used to, get loaded in, and it's uncomfortable for me. Like, is that a choice that I have? Can I say no and stay on that list? And these are things that the system had not really flushed through or thought about before, that we kind of were able to force the issue and now like kind of codify what that looks like for people. And yes, they have a choice, and we're able to put that in writing so that people feel comfortable saying no or making choices that are right for their life. Going back to empowerment, we really believe that choice is like incredibly powerful. And so we're always looking for ways that people can maintain their choice as they're subjects of this system that we've built. And I think final example that I really want to highlight is that, Destination Home has a very clear and often spoke about laser focus on permanent housing as being the solution to homelessness. But for folks who are recently homeless or currently homeless, that's less on their mind than like the way that people are being treated in the encampments by police or by sweeps, or the paltry conditions that people are living in from a health equity standpoint. So we have really committed as an organization to prioritizing and supporting financially, politically, whatever the board comes up with, even if it's not directly in line with like what we are steadfast working on every day at Destination Home. And I think that has even pushed and manifests into, there's a new community plan that's in the process of being adopted. It's a community-wide plan to end homelessness. It's something that will be adopted by many partners on this panel and all the jurisdictions in the counties and the cities. And it really drives our work around ending homelessness in Santa Clara County. And there is a one of 3 pillars, so a whole third of the plan is dedicated to interim housing solutions, which really speaks to what we hear day in and day out. And I would imagine that my fellow panelists here, as far as like the urgency of the matters that people are facing, that's not always the highest priority of the quote unquote system. So.
Thanks so much, Chad. Let's turn it over to Amelia. What does empowerment look like at Somos Mayfair, and what are the strategies?
Thank you. Yeah, I think something that comes to mind is thinking about one example with the families that we organize in the Alum Rock School District. And parents have organized Empuje committees, which are family-led committees that engage in school organizing work. And they regularly turn out hundreds of families to school board meetings that go till way after midnight. You know, they have parents who are reading 100-page budget documents, line item by line item. They led a campaign for language justice that got community liaisons and interpreters into all of the schools. And I think for like anyone who's done education work, what you're regularly told is that parent engagement is hard, that parents don't want to be engaged in their schools, and that at best you can get parents to like fill out a survey. And I think the truth of the matter is that parents and families aren't engaged because they're both actively and passively being excluded from decisions about their schools. And so that requires a shift in how we do our work for that to look different. And so I think like a few things that we've learned through that work, I think one is, you know, really making space for people to be able to bring their full selves and their full families into the work, and to honor and recognize all the different forms of leadership and all the different gifts and contributions that we have. I think sometimes we think of leadership in specific ways, or there's certain kinds of ways to contribute. And I think it really means making space for, if you are an amazing cook, you know, how are we feeding ourselves in our meetings? If you make amazing art, help us make banners for the protest, right? And how do we hone those skills and support each other in those skills and connect them to a shared purpose, right? And I think that also means that we have to make our spaces inclusive and accessible to folks, and ensure that we have interpretation, we have childcare, we have food at every meeting, right? And then the other piece of that, I think, has also been, it really requires a transformation in how we relate to each other in our institutions, right? I think oftentimes we, as organizations, have engaged with people as clients or as sort of customers, and it takes shifting to seeing each other as co-creators of the work that we're doing, and really being able to not just have input or feedback into our programs, but actually build strategy and make decisions together, right? Like everyone has said about their different projects, right? How are people actually deciding what is the work we're doing and how are we carrying it out? And I think part of that for Somos to hold ourselves accountable is that collective decision-making is actually one of our goals and one of our metrics that we use in our evaluation. And so we ask everyone 2 times a year, have you been a part of a collective decision-making space at Somos? And, you know, oftentimes people's answers are different than we think, because maybe our collective decision-making spaces aren't as transparent or aren't as clear as we thought that they were. But I think really making the how part of our goal and part of the way that we do the work. And then the last piece I would just say around that is also, I think moving away from this like individualized or isolated view of power empowerment to really, how are we building collective power, and how are we reclaiming and redistributing power, like Matt was saying, from where it has been taken, and not just reorganizing the same hierarchies where we're holding up sort of super leaders in our organizations, right? But really we need leaderful organizations and homes and schools and communities to build lasting shared power. And so making sure that we are building committees where people are making decisions together, and ultimately with the goal of how are we building our muscle and our decision-making practice so that communities can collectively self-determine what their schools, what their workplaces, what their homes, what their neighborhoods look like.
Thank you so much, Amelia. I think something that really kind of stands out, I mean, so much stands out, but I really want to highlight this idea of that it's just such intentional work. And I think that's kind of what I'm hearing from this entire conversation that I really want to lift up is that putting in the work to make this possible is like a core value and something that your organizations have really been very thoughtful and intentional about making possible. And I think oftentimes we see tangible steps like translation, like having food, like childcare, like all these different things as sort of these add-on things that are kind of this like almost something like a last minute piece. And I want to really call that out as we think about our organizations in terms of where we are. Like there are some very tangible steps that can be taken for things like these pieces that you lift up, to not be an add-on and to be centered so that it can allow for real leaderful agencies that you, as you said, and for folks to really participate and be a part of collective decision making. I want to now go to tips from you all, because I think we've got different folks that are listening to this conversation that are like, man, like, yes, like that's where we want to be. And it could be like, wow, like what's step one here? So what are your tips for some of the folks that might be listening in that are like, okay, we may want to go there. We're not completely there right now, but what's something I can do that's radically doable to be on the path to collective empowerment for and with the people that my institution serves? Let's start with Chad. Something radically doable.
I mean, what's radically doable is to ask for input and then act on it. Because I think people like ask for input all the time and then they don't act upon it. And I'll give a very recent example. We were designing this next phase of the financial assistance program. We knew that a lot of undocumented folks were the ones being left behind of all the federal and state stimulus dollars. We know that if we don't help the people who are most vulnerable, they're going to become what we call inflow into homelessness, which is like that's our whole program, our whole homelessness prevention system and system work is focused on. And we were trying to figure out basic things like how much money should we give each family and in what form. And so in partnership with Sacred Heart and a bunch of organizations that serve immigrant households day in and day out, which we don't, we're not the expert. They put together like a really rapid survey. They surveyed 300 households that could be potential recipients of assistance like this. They told us that we should assist at the level of $500 to $1,000 per household because that way the money would go further and more people would get helped. I will just say with complete honesty, that sounds like not enough. And we would have picked something higher. But we decided that people told us that's what the solution was for them. And that's what we're doing. And I mean, it's not very radical, but it feels radical because it's like against what we thought, right? It's against whatever we at Destination Home, this foundation of not all, but a lot of white people, I'm white, so I'll talk about myself, thought is best for people. And so we just got out of the way and did what people told us to do. So that's my radical idea.
I love it. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. Amelia, how about for you?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I think, one thing I'll say is I think oftentimes like this is really personal work because I think oftentimes, or I can speak for myself, like I'm used to doing certain things, carrying out certain bodies of work by myself without maybe input or without doing that in collaboration with others, right? And I think the way white supremacy works and the way that we replicate that in our organizations is a certain level of like perfectionism or thinking the work has to look a certain way and what professionalism looks like. And so I think, I've done certain trainings for many years and oftentimes like, I think those are great and they're fabulous and I want to keep doing them the way that I've always done them, right? And taking space to actually reflect on, you know, what will it take and what work do I need to do to, like everyone's saying, trust in other people, know that it will be better when people are making decisions and doing the strategy and carrying out the work together, and having faith in that. And so one thing that we've done, and one concrete thing I would say, is we've reflected, you know, each person as staff about what are the decisions we're making each day, what are the different projects we're working on, and what's one project or one decision that you're making that could be made in a different way right now. So just really concretely, like thinking about like one committee, one campaign, one program, and where's a decision that one person made or a few people made that could have been made collectively. And the last thing I would just say on that is, I think also oftentimes, again, we're driven by the feeling that like all the work is urgent and needs to happen as fast as possible. And I think that comes from a good place, but building in more time to move at a slower pace if we're going to move together, right? And so it might take a little bit longer, but the work that we're going to do is going to be sharper, it's going to be more impactful, and it's going to be more lasting. So I would just say, like, reflecting on the ways that we're all holding on to our own programming, our own work, identifying one place where those decisions could be happening differently, the strategy could be built differently, and then building in time for that to happen.
I love it. So move out of the way, pick one thing, pick one thing. Julia, what do you have to add?
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and add authentic implementation of voice, of community voice. And from my perspective, in juvenile justice work, I've found that, well, first off, sometimes I feel like a professional meeting goer. I go to committee meetings, I go to community meetings, and I go to work groups, and I go to subcommittees, and I go to subcommittees. And oftentimes I'm asked, let's bring young people into this space. Let's see what they have to say. And, you know, I made the mistake of doing that at first, bringing kids into these spaces. But, you know, I felt like a big mistake at first, because sitting in these spaces with my young people, you know, I've got police leadership, district attorney leadership, public defender leadership, nonprofit leadership in these spaces, making jokes, not using trauma-informed language, and, you know, in doing so, potentially re-traumatizing our young people by asking them to sit at the table with all these people who had originally traumatized them and their families, and then, hey, let's get together, solve the issue, but I'm just gonna check the box that you were here. That's certainly a big truth right now in the juvenile justice system reform work that we're doing. Is, you know, everybody wants youth voice, let's be real, it's the flavor of the month in the industry, but people are kind of just asking young people to step up to the table and then check, oh great, we have youth voice, great job everybody. No, not anymore, not anymore. Your local youth advisory council has stepped up to the plate and said, we will not attend these meetings unless they're useful and we feel included in a part of the work. We got to work with our kiddos and we said, okay, what is it gonna take then? What will it take for us to be a part of these meetings and to be able to actually push the work in a way that's beneficial to our communities and to the young people who are currently involved in the system, those who are formerly involved, and their families, right? Because we're looking at the continuum of care from that perspective. So the Youth Advisory Council got to work and they brainstormed a list of community agreements, and every committee that we walk into these days has to look at this, scrutinize it, and agree to it, sign, and say that yes, we will look at our young people in a way as our peers and colleagues, and not just the tokenized check, you're here in the room. But that's we're changing the standard. We're changing the standard in the way that our young people are witnessed and seen in our community here locally. And like I said, it's incremental. Like it's a really wonderful, great idea, and it came from our young people themselves. So I support it fully. But there's so much work that has to be done still. I still walk into these spaces sometimes, and there's still, you know, these systems of oppression that are very much in place and defensive. I'm gonna say it, you know, white supremacy is a thing here very locally, and our young people still feel it and see it every time we walk into these spaces, and it's got to be dismantled. So that's really my piece on this is that authentic implementation. We got to listen to our kids and ask them what they need. We need to speak a community language. we need to speak a community language, you know? I sit in partnership with all of my good friends in this industry who have all these incredible lofty credentials. And I'm grateful for the education in the room. I'm not one, I didn't finish college, but we don't speak our community's language for the most part. You know, we walk into these spaces and we're talking with these vernaculars that are just way up here over there around the corner, and our community, myself, we're having a hard time keeping up. So that's the other component of this. We need to speak a community language and authentically implement our community's voices.
Thank you for speaking so much truth on that. And I think, you know, what I think about, like, what's the third piece? It's like, if we're inviting, you know, something radical is about inviting people into these spaces, is that we as organizations have to be very clear about what does that look like? How do we set people up for success? And how do we, you know, how are we aware of power dynamics in the room? How are we aware of what's really happening in those spaces? And really checking ourselves to making sure that we're not having voices in that room that are just, you know, seen as tokens versus actually having power in those rooms. And I think that's the piece I really want to uplift here, is that that piece around power seems to be a big thread in this conversation, is that that's the difference between authentic empowerment and tokenism, authentic empowerment and just checking a box. Matt, tips. What's another tip to put out there for folks really starting to think about this?
A couple quick things from my power frame. One, a couple weeks ago, there was an action over at Happy Hollow about the trailers and why aren't we getting more people in the trailers who are unhoused, and why are we going to move them in 2 months because we want to open Happy Hollow. And the mayor's office was pretty unhappy about the attention that got. And I know that there were some nonprofit heads who kind of joined the chorus of, people are trying really hard, why are you being mean? Everyone's doing their best right now. And so the first tip and trick is, do not use your position, please, to further the aims of people in power. Let the people in power be upset. It's okay. You don't have to console them by using your position. And the other piece of it is, like, if you're thinking about everything that Amelia and Julia and Chad said about internally, is figure out who on your staffs is on board with all this, and bring them in early and talking about how their day-to-day work would need to be different to support these aims, rather than just showing up one day and saying, hey, this is what we do now. Figure out how to add this. So actually bring them in, figure out who the allies and accomplices are, and let them help drive, because they're closer to the people to begin with. And we need their buy-in to really do this.
Thank you, Matt. So I know we want to really open it up to folks that are hearing us. What questions do you have? I know Wendy's going to help us throw some of those questions to us. And I would just invite folks to share questions, but also the reflections that, you know, hearing this conversation has kind of gotten you to. Wendy, what do we have?
Thank you, Maria Noel. And so we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A box that have already been queued up. I want to encourage folks that have questions for our amazing panelists to go ahead and enter them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your control panel. And our first question today comes from Gabby Chavez Lopez, and she writes, I love that Jen Loving referred to the Lived Experience Board as the Lived Expertise Board in the last webinar that SVCN held last week. We've been through what have been some of the most effective strategies or trainings your organization has exercised to uplift the lived expertise of your clients to decision makers, especially in this digital space we are currently living in? And does this digital approach change any of those tactics? Anyone want to start?
Jen loves to, we always like wrestle with what the name should be of the Lived Experience Advisory Board. And kind of to the point of this conversation, I always am like, well, it's not going to change unless the Lived Experience Advisory Board wants to change it. But I do understand like the idea behind lived expertise. Although being somebody who has lived experience or expertise in homelessness, it can be a lot of weight on your shoulders to be a supposed expert in anything. So, but I think, the example that I want to bring up, we were asked to be part of a pretty early on conversation about an upcoming housing potential development site that's very public, and around victims of domestic violence. And it's time sensitive, and it's a huge opportunity. Again, I've been indoctrinated by where I work, but I also truly believe this. I mean, the solution to homelessness at the end of the day is housing from a physical standpoint. And this would be a really awesome opportunity for some very vulnerable people to have more housing in land right now that's not being used effectively. But we have a very short timeline because of government process and entitlement, et cetera. And we don't think that we'll be able to come together in person to do a group of folks who could be potential people living at this site, for example, to provide their input. And so we're kind of, my typical is like, hey, let's wait until we can gather again, phase 4 or whatever it's going to be called. But right now we have to kind of juggle and to respond to in this digital age or in this time, because I know from our experience that the people on our lived experience advisory board, for example, cannot all do Zoom. They don't all have internet access. They don't all have devices. They don't all have the comfort level to sit here and do what we're doing right now. That's part of the reason why we haven't held regular meetings, because I don't want to have a meeting where somebody is left out. But in this instance, we have to take advantage of the opportunity. And so we are going to individually speak and set up each person. And whether that means they're going to be in a room at our office, isolated and social distance, or if we need to deliver a device to their house and make sure that they have the technical support, we're going to go one by one and make sure that each person in this panel and this opportunity to weigh in on something that's really important has the ability to do so. So that's how we're dealing with the situation. It takes more work, but I think that we have to be committed to like being inclusive and lifting up those voices.
Thanks, Chad. And I want to add that I think this is something that so many of our organizations are really figuring, making the road while we run it, and trying new things and failing and trying new things and, and figuring some of it out and not a lot of it. So I really appreciate this question. I do think one thing that we've found is having the conversations with our folks around what does work. Like we're seeing an unprecedented amount of folks using their phones to capture what they're seeing in their communities. And so we're trying to figure out how do we use kind of what people's comfort level is with that to capture their stories and sharing their stories via kind of like a selfie video type of a thing, and being able to share that with decision makers as the way that they can be in communication. And so I think kind of this moment for so many reasons really calls us to be creative and step outside of our comfort zones to really figure out, like, is it a texting campaign? I'm always so in awe of people's interest and desire to tell their story, even through a text campaign with someone that they don't know. And so I think really trying new things is something that we're really prioritizing as an institution.
Thanks for that, Maria Noel. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right that we are building, we are running the track as the train is going. And I can't begin to underscore Chad's comments on the need to continue to be inclusive, even if we are digitally divided right now. I think to many of the earlier points that the panelists has made, there is that hunger for that connectivity between each other right now. And so I don't think anyone's come up with a great way to kind of troubleshoot that, but I think we should all continue to stretch ourselves, right? And think about different ways we can still facilitate some of that engagement that we're so used to having when we're able to gather and mobilize.
Mm-hmm. And you know what, can I add one more thing here that I like is actually a new, like new, not new? You know, so many of our folks, like this work has been built on people like using the good old phone. And I know it's kind of silly to raise in this context, but I actually do think that as folks doing advocacy or organizing work, that we have to go back to our roots of like, how do we build relationships? How do we follow up with folks? How do we do, you know, how do we set up phone trees? So it's not just, you know, me calling someone, but that we're distributing that leadership among the folks that we're working with, and they're calling their other 3 or 5 folks and having those conversations and then getting a message out. And so I think when we say like being bold and like thinking outside the box around like what are the tools, I think it's also going back to our roots around picking up the phone and having conversations with folks too.
Yeah, absolutely, Maria Dawn. I can't, I can't help but think about, some of those tried and true bread and butter type tactics we used before the age of the internet, right? The mass letter writing campaigns that people engaged in, which may be socially distance appropriate in these times. So I think there's something to be said about going back to some of those tactics we used prior to the digital era we find ourselves in. Okay, we have a question from Joy Garza, and Joy brings this up because police and law enforcement have been kind of continuous threads through this conversation today. Have any of the panelists partner with public safety or law enforcement, either in programs or in conversations about how to better function together cohesively in the event there were opportunities to do so, and what was the outcome or success? And then in general, if you were to give one piece of advice for local law enforcement, what would it be? So I think, Julia, you started to talk a little bit about this and some of the work at FLY. I would love for you to kind of kick that discussion, this question off, and then we can do a round robin and see if anyone else wants to chime in.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, so we've been working on a couple of pretty incredible projects. When we first launched, I gotta back way up though, because when we first launched our preparing to launch our Youth Advisory Council, we wanted to make sure that our work was informed and that we talked to enough young people to kind of build what our mission would be. So we held a series of focus groups and we talked to young people who were formerly system involved, currently system involved, and youth in the institutions. We know, in fact, talking to our young people in the institutions have had, in fact, the most system involvement. So we made it a point to do that. And across the board, in every focus group, it was brought up that young people wanted to be a part of the hiring process for probation officers, for new probation officers. And, it's something that, we've felt in the industry for a long time is how do we implement youth voice there? To have the data, was such an incredible, powerful tool, because after we launched, we were able to continue that conversation with that data in hand and say, hey, our young people want to be a part of this process. We have officially participated in the last 3 DPO core trainings. Deputy Probation Officer core training is the training camp, if you will, for new probation officers who are going to be fully supervising young people. They must pass DPO core training, and it's basically all of the rules and regulations that a supervising probation officer would need to know. We are able to, at every single DPO core presentation now moving forward, every new PO will receive a workshop from our Youth Advisory Council, where kids on the council have created this incredible presentation where they themselves go and talk about establishing rapport with young people on their caseloads. The feedback from DPO course, I'm sorry, I get the feedback all the time. I talk really fast, so I'm gonna take a breath. The feedback from youth participating in DPO core, it's been pretty incredible from new probation officers. And I mean, don't get me wrong, again, we have a lot of work to do. But new probation officers have said that, it's really solidifying that after this long DPO core process of going through this training academy and then being able to sit down with young people who've experienced the system itself kind of brings the work full surface, and our young people are feeling very much a part of that process. The outcomes and data, we're a ways away from that, right? And how that is happening, we've got to really track these things and figure out how to do so. But also from that work, a couple of really incredible ideas have stemmed from the work that we're doing with the juvenile Justice Systems Collaborative and the Racial Equity in Justice Systems Subcommittee, where we're having conversations with other law enforcement agencies about, in fact, replicating this workshop that's driven, designed, and led by youth from the community who have navigated probation themselves in their past. So that's just a little bit of the work. I'm happy to answer any more questions about that because
Yeah, no, absolutely. Julia.
on and on and on
I'm
about
kind of
it.
as a follow-up to that, I'm curious as to how that approach has been received by the other law enforcement agencies that you're starting to talk to. Are they exhibiting some anxiety about that? And you know, any thoughts on how to you know, get the buy-in of these other law enforcement agencies who may not feel so ready to embrace this approach?
That's a really great question, Wendy. And we had some concerns going into the first presentation that we did. And one thing that we did was we made sure that our young people knew that they could bring their most authentic and honest selves. And we had youth talking about implicit bias, and we had youth talking about really really terrible experiences that they'd had with law enforcement and how they felt like that box being checked by their probation officers. And for the most part, it was very well received. It was very well received by those probation officers. We talked to those POs, we debriefed with those POs from that session afterward, and they were grateful for it. So we moved forward bravely with that information in hand. Like, it's coming, here it comes. You know, we're doing our best to make sure that we as the adults are moving forward with as much respect, you know, as we can possibly muster, but also making sure that it's important that our young people are seen and heard authentically. And, you know, we haven't had yet today, I'm saying yet cautiously, any pushback on it. And we are having conversations with the Sheriff's Department about making sure that this workshop can be replicated in those training academies in the near future. So yeah, we'll see. It's a great question. It's brand new work. And like I mentioned before, it's incremental, right? We'll see, but we're moving forward bravely. It's not gonna stop.
Absolutely, and that's what it's gonna take to continue to move that needle. So for, I guess, the other part of Joy's question is, you know, what is one piece that we would give to law enforcement in general? And, you know, I want to reframe that into, you know, what is something we can share with law enforcement about how to authentically engage with communities that have been disproportionately impacted by police brutality. Anyone? Not an easy answer, I know.
Not an easy answer and not really an answer, but I think one piece that is not just for law enforcement agencies, but I think for all of us, is to listen. There are folks that, particularly around this issue being raised, you know, we've got so many of the youth leaders that are screaming, yelling for all of us to be listening and to really be following. And so as we think about what does it look like, I think it really is listening to where people are at, what they're raising as the issues and what they're raising as solutions, because there are solutions that they're raising. And then, you know, as Chad so eloquently said, is, you know, and then getting out of the way and, you know, following the lead of those folks that, you know, we're saying we need to prioritize and really value.
Thank you for that, Maria Noel. So our next question, and if you have, we've got time for maybe another question. We have one more question that actually came in from our CEO, Kira. And really, as a Council of Nonprofits, we're always thinking about how we can encourage nonprofits to think of different ways to activate their missions. And as you heard Kira note at the top of the program, how advocacy is absolutely core to achieving and activating the missions of nonprofits. So for organizations that have not even engaged in formally gathering community input, where do you start? And how can we work with our boards, our nonprofit board members, who you may not be completely attuned to what's going on in the community, to be persuaded to think of root causes, advocacy as central to the organization's mission?
for us at Destination Home, I mean, I would say adding somebody to your board who has lived experience or who identifies with who you're trying to serve is a huge step forward. Before we ever had the Lived Experience Advisory Board, we had somebody on our board of directors who had lived experience. We now have 3 people on our board of directors who have lived experience. And we're kind of going through a formal process of using the leverage and using the fundraising capacity that we have to kind of help other organizations that we work with, that we fund, and that we partner with to do the same. And I think, alternatively, we do have space in our Lived Experience Advisory Board membership meetings for guests to come. And it has been a very frequent occurrence for people to come and just check it out because they're thinking about doing it for themselves. We had someone from probation, for example, come and say they wanted to do a board. And I think people, my sense, and I just want to thank everybody who attended, like of the 21 people that were on at one point, they probably all are maybe trying to do this or advance their own organization or own world around how do we center and empower the people that we're here to serve. So, we welcome people to come for the first half of our meeting to check that out. So those are just two practical tools.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Chad. I'm curious to draw out Matt and Amelia here. I know, Matt, you talked a little bit earlier about kind of the some of the power dynamics that were involved in the board leadership at Sacred Heart and how that has how that's been challenged a bit. And so I would love to hear a little bit more about really kind of some of the work that can be done to try to get boards in a place where they're more willing to embrace advocacy as part of their approach to achieving the organization's mission.
That feels like a big question. I mean, the most honest answer is that we have now 10 years of organizing being part of our strategic plan, and we've gone through a lot of the painful culture change. I mean, Maria Noel can attest to what it was like in 2010. It's way different now, different than it was in 2016. If I was putting together a board or in charge of a board, I would think of it like, okay, I got to organize these people. I feel like people who are on boards love the idea of doing like visioning exercises and things like that. So bring people together and actually take them through a process of unpacking what the root causes are. Take them through a process of recognizing that we got to talk about race and gender and disability and all other forms of oppression and how we're replicating those things and what we're doing and what we need to do. And like, I mean, it's not like, this is very different than the like, what's the radically easy thing to do? The first thing, I think this is like a process, right? That you gotta build the board from within and then think about who you can bring on as you go, as people cycle off or whatever, who are already on board with the idea. So it's gonna take a while, and it's gonna be tense, and it's gonna be scary, and people just have to commit to doing it for the long haul.
And as Maria Noel noted, being uncomfortable, right? Yeah. For a little bit of time.
Yeah.
Amelia,
I'm sorry, just saying, like, giving up power does not feel good. I think no matter who we are, even when we want to do it, it just doesn't feel great until you've done it. And then it's one of those things like, oh, I'm so glad I did that.
Absolutely. So thank you for that, Matt. Amelia, do you have any thoughts you want to add there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess I would just say, I think, so we all have this vision of where we want to get to. And I think it's been really helpful to think about what are the stepping stones that move us in that direction concretely, and also realizing it's not linear and we're going to take steps back and we're going to, like Maria Noel was saying, we're going to make mistakes, right? But what are the mistakes we want to be making? And I think I really echo what Matt said about, taking the time to do organizing training with your board, doing political education, having these conversations. And I think the more that those can be spaces with board and with community and with staff together, we've started organizing like our retreats, our, like our collective meetings, our spaces where board is there as well. And I think that's really important. And I would just say, those two pieces, like we're going to make mistakes. So what kind of mistakes do we want to make? Is it planning out these like hugely like well thought out programs that end up falling flat? Or is it trying new things that are more engaged and rooted in community, and maybe we learn that certain strategies don't work? You know, so which mistakes do we want to be making? And then I think like we have this opportunity right now in this moment, in the midst of this crisis and in the midst of all of the violence and all of the deep pain, I think where it's so clear that we need everyone, right, to get out of the situation that we're in. And I think, you know, we're going to need all, the problems are vast, the crisis is deep, and we're going to need all the wisdom, all the hearts, all the hands, all the minds that we can get. And so I think this is really a moment of, I think, a space to reflect and to really think about, you know, if we continue in the same way, we're not going to build the actual communities and the kind of safety and the kind of well-being that we need to get us through this moment and beyond that, right? And so I think, how is this an opportunity to have those conversations?
So I love that thought, Amelia, and really seizing upon this opportunity to really be reflective and to bring those voices in and to amplify them, because you're absolutely right. We're not going to be able to figure this out if we keep doing the same darn old thing we've been doing. And with that, I'll turn it back over to my colleague, Jen, to close us out for today. I want to thank the panel and our fabulous moderator, Maria Noel, for their wisdom and their leadership. And Jen, take it away.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you again to our panel. Can we please, everyone who's still here, let's give them a round of applause. I know that if we were in the room, it would be like a really energetic room. So thank you to all of you. I was sitting here trying to hold my emotions together as I heard all of you speak. And, you know, I just really appreciate all of the work that you're all doing in the community, for the community. So thank you. Thank you for that discussion. Now, I just want to wrap it up by thanking our sponsors again. You know, there have been a lot of changes to the programming, so we really appreciate all of our sponsors sticking with us through all of that. And I also want to remind everybody that next Thursday is our next session. We'll have Kathleen Kelly-Janis from the governor's office to talk about the budget, nonprofits and equity. I know she's been working on trying to engage nonprofits better with the state of California. So please, if you haven't registered for that, go ahead and register at sbcn.org. And just a reminder that SBCN is really here for the nonprofit community. So you're all serving the community of people. We're all serving the community of you and your organizations. So if you need anything from us, here is all of our contact information. Please feel free to reach out to any of us at any time. And just a quick reminder, as soon as I end this webinar, there's going to be a pop-up window. Say that you want to go there because that leads you to the evaluation of our workshop. And on that note, you know, oh, Wendy dropped a message in the chat, sorry, to become a board member, become a member, sorry, of the SBCN. So yes, follow that link if your organization is not yet a member. But on that note, I want to wish everybody a happy Thursday. Stay safe out there. I know this weekend there's going to be a lot of activity, so please, please, please stay safe. And have a good afternoon. Thank you.